Soulless Dead, Chapter 3. Battle begins. As I told you earlier, things were about to escalate to something a little more feverish, and sure enough they did. We noticed a police car driving down the road towards our house. He hopped the curb and parked in our driveway/yard area. He got out, and it was Officer Eric Savage, a good friend, close family friend. It seemed wherever our family went, we made good friends with the police. Of course, doing foster care, a lot of the kids could become unruly, and unfortunately, you can't spank them, so the police would have to get involved. Of course, people understood that the kids came from bad situations, but the police still showed up, and he was there for us. Officer Savage got out of his car and came up to us and asked us if we were all okay. My dad confirmed as he climbed out of the truck to get near him. Apparently, Officer Savage was a part of a scrimmage line with the National Guard and a couple others just on the other side of town. We live on the southwest side, and he said that apparently they had started a quarantine zone of some sort, and that it had just gotten overwhelmed around the hospital areas near St. Francis and Wesley Medical, a place that I owed quite a bit of money before all this started. So thank God for that, I don't have to pay it anymore. Well, Officer Savage explained that despite their best efforts, despite all the scrimmage lines they had made and all the fortifications they made, it seemed that the disease had bested them. There was no real way of getting ready, and they found that out rather fast. He had told us about how he had to shoot so many people. He then paused and said that they weren't really people anymore because they were already dead. He told us a first-hand account of seeing those things come after him as he shot them in the chest and then the legs to collapse them. They just keep moving. He saw the blood coming out of their nose and their eyes and even their ears from the blood swelling and the symptoms that led to them dying and then being reanimated. He heard the gurgling of their throats, and they were just disgusting. The stench was the worst, that he explained. That when you die, you do void your bowels, and it's a rather gross thing, smelling of poop and feces. He said that was probably one of the worst things because when they kept coming, you could see some of it run down their legs and just all sorts of nastiness. But he got used to it. They realized that shooting them in the head was just about the only way to take them down, or blowing them up to where the body couldn't function anymore. It's amazing that they actually sanctioned tank rounds to go off in this public area. Tank rounds. We're talking about 90 millimeters of tungsten, moving at several thousand feet per second with an explosive charge inside, hitting something like the ground around them and bursting. They even had anti-personnel rounds, which wasn't really sure if those were real or not at the time, but apparently it just turns the tank into a large shotgun, firing bearings as round as my thumb at 7,000 feet per second. They told us that not all the horses and all the king's men could take out all these things, and it was a rather funny reference, but he was very serious. Officer Savage had always helped our family. He'd become a good friend the year that we lived in Wichita at the time, and he helped us out quite a bit. He was a good man. He told us that he was worried about his family, but he came by to stop here because we'd become close friends and invited him to a barbecue not a couple months ago, and really hit it off, and invited him to church even at Rose Hill where we went. He said he was worried, and he went back to his car and opened up the back seat and grabbed a pistol that he grabbed from the evidence locker that he had commandeered, as he said, to give to us. He gave us a couple of boxes of 38 special rounds and the little stubby revolver. You could tell that it was a revolver that got confiscated because the serial number was scraped off and it probably had the blood of the innocent on it. But at this point, anything would have helped. He told us to be very careful and to lay low and to stay away from major metropolitan areas like the middle of the city. He said that when it all started, it took him 3 hours with 6 other guys to get out of the town to make it over to where we lived, which was less hustle and bustle. 3 hours. I thought to myself, how bad does it have to be where it took 3 hours? He said he barely made it, and the other guys tried to scatter and go on foot. He saw one of them get killed by those things, as he said. He tried his best, but he It was either fight or flight, and, well, you can't fight them all. I noticed as he turned around to grab more stuff for us, another 38s and a couple other boxes of bullets like 22 and blah blah, and more of that. I noticed that on his belt his radio was completely unplugged. Stupid question, but I asked him what that was about. He stood up, turned around, and said, around the time it started, radio chatter had gotten so thick and so full of fire calls and people calling the police and acts of violence and disputes and riots in the streets that he just couldn't take it anymore. He said he just pulled the plug and turned off the radio completely because there was no point, that there was no hope, and I could see that this man who believed in justice and devoted his life to helping people, a good man, a good cop, I saw hope fleeing from his eyes. We had talked to him about it in the event that something bad happened, that we would flee to our little small town retreat. And we asked him if he'd like to come with us, but he said that he had to go get his family first. We understood Officer Savage and his fear that his family could be in trouble. So with the tip of his hat, he got back into his car and drove off. Well, about that time, more of those things showed up, and, well, we had to fight them off. 3 of them came at me pretty quickly. My dad grabbed his M14, and what you don't know about this guy, he was a crack shot. He popped one in the eye and took the butt of his gun and slammed it into the other one's face as the other one tried to grab my arm. It fell over. I pulled my revolver, a Chiappa Rhino, really accurate, really nice. I fired a .357 Magnum right into his head, and it burst. It burst like a watermelon at a Gallagher show. Got everywhere, all over my legs and on my pants. First I was disgusted, but it was better to get it on my pants than to be bitten dead. The other one started to get up after his face was plowed in by my dad's rifle stock. I kicked it in the face and dropped it again and grabbed one of my mini knives on me and stuck it through his eye. At first it was really easy, but I slid it into the skull. It gave a little bit of a slowness to the blade entry. There was so much violence and hate in my life after all the bad things that happened to me that I rather enjoyed it. My breathing was heavy. I was upset and I was angry. Again, why did this thing have to ruin my life? I looked at it, and the guy had a beard and red hair, and he even had a wedding ring on. I looked into the eye that wasn't destroyed by the knife, and I thought, what did this guy do? I looked at his neck, and he had been bitten, probably by his wife. It's not easy to get bit on the neck, let alone the fact that he'd had to get close to one of them for that to happen. What situation was this poor bastard in that it put him in this situation to die? Did he die like a hero, or did he die like a pig? Stuck, scared, squealing in pain, holding his neck while it bled out. Again, the symptoms were there: the nose bleeds, the eyes bleeding, and the ears bleeding. The eyes were milky white from the swelling and unable to see. His mouth agape. The body went limp, and, well, I pulled the knife, wiped it off with a small rag on my person, put it back in its sheath. I stood up and stumbled back, and my dad grabbed me by the pull piece on my tactical vest. He told me we had to get ready to go. We had to listen to Officer Savage. He holstered the gun and gave me the bullets to hold on my person. My brother Charles came outside, and my family and my mother, they all came out in their carpet armor that we had made for them and piled into the SUV. Me and my brother Charles had grabbed the technology that we could use and some of the stuff, and I grabbed some of my extra weapons in my room, mostly hand-to-hand stuff. I put him in our Lumina, a nice little car, and it was really nice. It was really comfortable. Tell you what, I had to scoot the chair back because all my armor was so thick. Again, the small stuff got in the way. I could tell Charles was needing someone to reassure him. My brother Charles had suffered from mental illness from an early stage because his parents, his real parents, of course, did drugs, causing him to be a little more mentally stifled. but he was a good kid, had a brave heart, and would love somebody to the very end. But he was scared. I looked at him and I told him, "Brother, I'm going to protect you with everything that I am." A lot of people wouldn't believe that we were brothers simply because he was black and I was Mexican American. But, of course, being in a foster family, you get these sort of things, but I loved him all the same. He looked at me with the most serious eyes he's ever had and told me that no matter what, he would protect me because he cared about me. He said if a zombie comes up on you, he'll butt it off and fight it off so that I could get away. But I reassured him by grabbing his arm and I told him that he would never have to come to that. He looked at me and then looked forward and told us we should probably leave. The SUV sped off and we all headed off towards Rose Hill, where we were going to meet up at the church, of all places. That was the longest ride and the longest commute that I'd ever had. We were listening to the radio at first, and every radio station was saying the same thing over and over. NPR, local radio stations, the country stations, the rock and roll stations, the rap stations were all saying the same thing. Find cover, be with your loved ones, and hope that nothing bad happens. We've been listening a little more, and we've been told that the government had been doing everything in its power to keep the power stations and the electricity on, which we thought was a good thing. They had turned some of the small coal plants that we had, and some nuclear power plants, and so on and so forth, into small bastions of hope. They had turned what was supposed to be an industrial area into a small fortress. They said so long as the supplies were kept safe, that they would be able to keep the power on for all of us. Which made that immediately a no-fly zone for us. A reporter said that there were tanks parked around it. There were metal walls and concrete buffer walls placed up, like you see in Iraq when they turn a small forward operating base into a full-blown citadel. Well, it was a good thing, I guess. That way we'd at least have some kind of commodity. We began to make our way, and as we were driving down the road, I called my parents on my cell phone and I told them not to stop for anything. My parents were willing to help anybody, but I told them that a lot of times people would mug you, pull you out of your car, and even kill you. What seemed to be a simple car accident where someone was waving people down could immediately come to somebody with a gun in the bushes off to the left or right, ready to blow your head off and take everything you had. Long and short, we're not proud of it. We had to do it a couple times. One so much as had the gall to open fire at us. Not a very good shot, as the bullets mostly hit the tire well or the trunk. We sped off quickly. We eventually made it to Rose Hill, where we saw that the people of the town had actually gotten together and closed off a lot of the roadways. We told them who we were and where we were, and thankfully, a couple of the people from the church that we went to were holding up that area. They let us through, and we went to the church, where we saw more fortification. They took some of the extra cars and circled around the front of the church itself, where the glass doors were. We drove our truck and we parked it towards the front of it, and we got out and we got into the church where all of our friends were. You'd think that we were getting ready to pack up boxes and moving the church itself, but they were full of food and supplies. We saw some of the normal characters. Our deacon Vince. Our pastor Jim had somehow made it from Wichita, where we were at as well. Of course, he was more towards the danger. His shirt was covered in blood, of course. Bit of shock was on his eyes. Some of the women had grabbed some of the perishables and started cooking in the kitchen, which was nice because the whole church smelled like steak and pork and all sorts of things like that. So we ate pretty good that day. But there was one thing that I almost noticed constantly. The silence. Everyone was quiet. Nobody really knew what to do. Some of the men would be whispering each other, talking to each other, and scheming and plotting and making up plans. But nobody was really saying anything of any kind of substance, which I found was a little disturbing. But at this point, I'm no better. We grabbed our supplies from the truck and placed it inside the church, and we had some men set up sentries, so to speak. Men who sat out there with guns, ready to protect our area. Since we were out in the country, the dead were not really populous, and the ones that had already started going were already shot and burned. It seems like people in the country already have it on the lockdown. God bless small towns, I guess.